And just a year later, you have probably one of the most famous predictions that have been made. USA Today, citing the former U.S. Vice President, Mr. Al Gore, they wrote this, quote, "The Arctic Ocean may be nearly ice-free in the summer as early as 2014. And again, these predictions just kept snowballing, no pun intended. In summer of 2012, the Australian wrote this, quote, "Enjoy snow now. By 2020, it'll be gone." In July of 2013, you had The Guardian, quote, "Ice-free Arctic in 2 years heralds methane catastrophe, says a scientist." Then in August of 2017, you had the Sydney Morning Herald, quote, "Snowy retreat, climate change puts Australia's ski industry on a downhill slope." For the last one, by the way, the weather data shows that over in Australia, it's been snowing quite as usual in recent years. Then we get to January of 2018, and this was when a Forbes article, citing a Harvard University professor, wrote this, quote, "The chance that there will be any permanent ice left in the Arctic after the year 2022 is essentially zero." For your reference, even though the odds were against it, at this very moment, there's about 5.6 million square miles of Arctic sea ice. Then, in June of 2018, Ms. Greta Thunberg, the young climate activist, she shared a story on Twitter which was titled this, quote, "Top climate scientist says humans will go extinct if we don't fix climate change by 2023. To which Greta added this, quote, "A top climate scientist is warning that climate change will wipe out all of humanity unless we stop using fossil fuels over the next 5 years. Now, for some odd reason, Greta decided to delete that particular tweet earlier this year. And she was not the only one that had to delete her earlier prediction. That's because in January of 2020, Glacier National Park had to remove one of their signs because that sign claimed that all the glaciers would be melted away by the year 2020, which would be an awkward thing to read in the year 2020 when you can still see the glacier in the background. Then, in December of 2021, the LA Times ran a story with this headline, quote, "A no-snow California could come sooner than you think." Interestingly enough, a few weeks after this article was published, researchers over at UC Berkeley announced that California actually had the snowiest December on record. Regardless, though, a year later, in August of 2022, Bloomberg reported this, quote, "The end of snow threatens to upend 76 million American lives." However, it's worth noting that just a few months later, the Sierra Nevada mountains saw their second snowiest winter on record. And then, of course, right now, right at this moment, California is getting blasted with a bomb cyclone with record levels of snow coming down quite literally as we speak. Which all brings us neatly back to the doomsday clock over in Union Square, which claims that we only have a few years left. And you know what? This time, they might be right. Like the boy who cried wolf too many times, well, this time, it might really be the end. However, in a more realistic assessment, after going through this entire list of 33 predictions which didn't quite pan out, it seems like these climate predictionists are shooting themselves in the foot. Because instead of just presenting the data and the research that they were able to pull together and explaining to the people, explaining to the public at large their findings in a rational and clear way, it seems like instead they just insist on continuing to issue these predictions one after the other. And these predictions, after they fail to materialize, well, they lead more and more people to trust these so-called climate scientists less and less. Perhaps that would explain why it's mostly young people at these climate protests. Since they haven't lived through the past 50 years of these predictions, they perhaps assume that this latest prediction is the only one, and therefore it must be right.